Am I wrong here? This feels like we've crossed a major line.
Yeah, this is in some ways a Rubicon crossing, unprecedented. Republic is beyond crumbling. We're beneath the banana republic kind of moment. And on the other hand, I would say maybe this is even more disturbing. This is kind of par for the course from what we've seen in terms of the weaponization and politicization of the national security apparatus against anyone who dares dissent from its orthodoxy, and especially anyone who threatens its power and privilege. And Donald Trump is perceived to be, as I write in this Newsweek piece, an existential threat as one individual representing tens of millions of Americans to our ruling class, to their gravy train, to this club that they have created. And they feel they need to crush anyone and everyone who would dare cross them. And where this is a uniquely disturbing and devastating moment is you have a president's administration, his DOJ/FBI, being sicked on the predecessor as a private citizen over documents that federal authorities have already reviewed to the best of our knowledge. This is usually handled to the extent this really has to do with potentially classified documents, which Donald Trump reportedly had already declassified. And again, authorities already had reviewed. That's a pretext as far as I'm concerned, but let's take them at their word in good faith. You don't need to sick FBI agents on Mar-a-Lago to go after these documents and crack open the former president's safe. There are normal channels by which you could negotiate and obtain whatever you think you need to obtain. But I can't accept that this is a good faith act, because every single week there's a new act of rank corruption and politicization emanating from this apparatus. I mean, remember, just in the last couple weeks, Chuck Grassley has said that the FBI and DOJ protected Hunter Biden in numerous ways while going after Grassley and Ron Johnson for probing Hunter Biden. And then Jim Jordan says that the FBI whistleblowers tell him they're cooking the books in terms of the doubling of domestic violent extremism investigations in this country. Obviously, we can go all the way back to Russiagate and beyond. One event after the other, it always cuts one way. Regime dissenters get attacked, get punished to the fullest extent, and the regime protects its own.
Yeah, I think if this was the first time or the first thing we saw, I'd be more open to the idea that it maybe has some credibility behind it or something. I mean, this just seems like a fishing expedition by a group of people that are completely obsessed with removing Donald Trump from public life. And him specifically, I mean, I think you're right in that it's much broader than just Donald Trump, but they are laser focused on making sure they do not have to beat this guy in an election.
Absolutely. And they've become everything that they claim to hate and oppose. Or maybe they always have been this way, and it was just that Trump brought it out of them. And when they talk about the bad orange man being this fascist and authoritarian, they are engaging precisely in fascist and authoritarian acts by sicking the entire security state on a political opponent. They don't hate Trump because they thought he would break institutions and violate norms, as they've done time and time again to combat Trump. They hated Trump because he uniquely threatened their power and privilege, because he actually presented policies counter to their conventional policies that they've so richly benefited from. Well, we've suffered from them in so many different ways. And so that was the big threat of Trump. The big threat of Trump was always that he threatened to upset their apple cart, this racket that they've created. He called them liars, crooks, and thieves, phonies to their face. They could not tolerate that. And so, yes, uniquely, they loathe him and feel they need to destroy him. But just as equally, they feel they need to bring to heel the lowliest of January 6 detainees held in pretrial detention without pennies to their name, being held in many cases on trumped-up, glorified trespassing charges. That's not to legitimize or claim that people who engaged in crimes on January 6 ought not to be prosecuted to the fullest extent, even though on their side they don't prosecute to the fullest extent. But it is to say that it's even down to the lowliest Trump supporter. They feel they need to send a message and crush them to try and silence and intimidate tens of millions of Americans who feel the same way.
It's a terrifying moment. Let's talk a little bit about the process here, because this is not the normal way this goes, right? We've never seen this happen in history when it comes to a former president. We have had back and forths, however, between the National Archives and former presidents. We've seen this happen before. What could they have done other than raid his residence?
Well, I mean, first of all, by all accounts, President Trump has cooperated with federal authorities, namely the National Administration of Records, regarding collecting these documents taken to Mar-a-Lago, purportedly some of which were sensitive, and that's the pretext for this raid. But I mean, first of all, well before you get here, if there was contention over these documents, then litigate, just as the administration, or rather the Jan 6 committee, litigated with respect to some of these documents. I mean, the president has invoked executive privilege before. It's been litigated in a court. I mean, I think we've all seen that the courts themselves are not the most independent and impartial arbitrators necessarily, but at least that's a more legitimate process than executing a search warrant and sending these FBI agents to raid the place. There are any number of steps that could have been taken first. Normal course cooperation, if need be, litigation, you can subpoena, a whole array of options you can take before you ratchet it up to the most extreme one. And, this builds, by the way, on Eric Holder just a few days ago saying he believes an indictment is coming against President Trump. We've seen the fact that apparently federal officials, prosecutors have been reaching out to those in Donald Trump's inner circle lately for interviews. So this, to me, looks like the ramping up of a process that ultimately will culminate in the indictment of President Trump. Wow. Andy McCarthy has said that this is a pretext, the notion that this is about the Presidential Records Act, that this is actually all about January 6th. I think it could be all of the above, because once you go in and start looking at all the documents in his home, of course, you can find anything under pretext of whatever the original investigation was. So this is a show me the man and I'll show you the crime process. And I think for anyone who had doubts, I think we're now at about 100% that an indictment is coming from, quote unquote, moderate, independent, impartial Merrick Garland.
That's a remarkable statement. I mean, and I think it does seem to be going that way. I saw Andy's analysis as well, and I think it seems to be at least it seems to make sense, right? Like that they would use this minor thing to go in there, and then they can get access to as much as they want. But what happened to like the scope of a warrant? Just the limitations on an investigation. If you go into someone looking for, like we've seen this with the Alex Jones text recently, right? Where they said, hey, send us all your Sandy Hook texts. And then they sent all the texts to him, and apparently some very strange photos involved in such. But like, they didn't have access to those texts initially, with naked photos going back and forth. They were limited to the scope of the investigation, Sandy Hook. Here it seems like they're like, okay, well, we got in the door, so therefore all of this is ours.
Well, and I think, and of course, we haven't seen the text of the warrant, but again, I can't hold them as operating in good faith here or have this pretense of legitimacy just given the acts that have led up to this. I mean, just take Carter Page, for example. Okay, the FISA warrant on Carter Page. Remember the lengths that they went to, literally doctoring an email, covering up the fact that Carter Page himself had been an informant and helped, I believe, the FBI and CIA in pursuing Russians. They hid all that. Of course, they leaked information that was inaccurate to a press to spin it out there and then reincorporate that into the FISA warrants, all of which is a way of saying they will use any tactic to get a person if they want to get them. And Carter Page, remember, was a wedge into all of Trump world. And I think there's an analog here in terms of you get into Mar-a-Lago, you're reportedly looking for specifics in documents, supposedly sensitive documents, even though the president has claimed that he's declassified all these sensitive documents, and he's the ultimate authority on that, even though he got subverted time and time again by his own administrative officials in trying to declassify things for the good of the American people. Why would we expect that they would limit themselves to whatever the four corners of that search warrant say? I put it on the other side to say, prove it. Where's the record of integrity and credibility here?
Yeah, at this point, it's on them to prove that they are actually acting in good faith. Your piece says that this moment is a time for choosing. Can you explain that? What are we choosing in this moment?
Yeah, I think it's between a uniparty ruling class establishment that consistently closes ranks and protects its institutional power and privilege against the American people. And I say uniparty because look at the utter deafening silence among so many in the Republican Party today, particularly at the senior ranks. Okay, the best you could argue is that they are really afraid of running afoul of the security state themselves because it's that powerful. And look, I think that's true. When Chuck Schumer talks about they can get you 6 ways from Sunday, referring to the intelligence community and Trump, first of all, it's really disturbing that a U.S. senator with that much power says that. And he honestly says that. What does that say about the fact that our security state has this much power? But on the other hand, it's, do you understand what time it is? And what time it is that there's an onslaught against our most basic liberties in this country. Anyone who dissents from kind of current thing-ism or whatever the conventional wisdom is in Washington can be targeted using the full powers of security state. I think we've talked before. The National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism that this administration has put out calls for a whole of government plus private sector effort to counter quote unquote anti-authority or anti-government figures, which of course means anyone who dares have a different opinion from what the prevailing opinion is in Washington. If you don't understand that this leads to the persecution of tens of millions of Americans on the basis of their deeply held political beliefs, you don't know what time it is, and you're standing on the wrong side. So you either stand with the American people or you stand with an utterly reckless and lawless regime lashing out in the most abusive of ways right before our very eyes in a brazen, overt way that I don't think we've ever seen before necessarily in American history.
Ben, about 30 seconds left. Let me just go to politics for 1 second. Does this help Donald Trump? Does this hurt Donald Trump?
I think on balance, it's probably a help because this energizes potentially millions of independent and apolitical Americans. You have some people hypothesizing, well, this is definitely going to force Donald Trump to run, and the Democrats like that because they think he's beatable. On the other hand, you have other people saying this reeks of desperation. They're doing anything they can to destroy him, and this is only going to empower him. I think on balance, it's probably a help because it further exposes how corrupt this regime is and what the two sides are, what the choice is in 2024.
Ben Weingarten, senior contributor to The Federalist, deputy editor of Real Clear Investigations, fellow at the Claremont Institute. His piece with Newsweek is FBI's Mar-a-Lago raid presents a time for choosing the regime or America. We'll tweet that out as well. Ben, great to see you, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe to our channel so you'll be sure to see similar videos from Blaze TV with the added bonus of signaling YouTube that your voice and opinion still matters. And if you're looking for more great conservative content, check out one of the 2 videos suggested here.